The sun dipped low over Maplewood, painting the Midwest sky in streaks of orange and pink, when a sharp crash shattered the evening calm. Jake Thompson jolted upright in his garage, the wrench in his hand clattering to the concrete floor. He'd been working late, again, tinkering with a stubborn carburetor under the flickering fluorescent lights of Thompson's auto repair. Maplewood wasn't the kind of town where crashes happened after supper. People were usually on their porches sipping sweet tea or watching the Cardinals game, not stirring up trouble. Jake wiped his grease-streaked hands on his overalls and stepped toward the open garage door, peering into the dusk. Down the street, under the glow of a single lamppost, he spotted them. Derek D. Lawson and his ragtag crew, hunched over a beat-up sedan like vultures on roadkill. The car's hood was popped, and one of D's buddies, some wiry kid with a backwards cap, was yanking at wires while D barked orders, his voice cutting through the quiet like a chainsaw. "Hey!" Jake shouted, his boots crunching gravel as he strode out. "What do you think you're doing?" D straightened up, all 6 feet of him, his leather jacket creaking as he turned. A smirk curled his lips, the kind that said he owned the night, and maybe the whole town if he felt like it. "Mind your own business, Jake. This ain't your fight." Jake squared his shoulders, his hazel eyes steady. "It is when you're tearing up my town." He recognized the car. It belonged to Mrs. Hargrove, the librarian who'd brought him cookies last week for fixing her grandson's bike. D wasn't just messing with metal, he was messing with Maplewood. D snorted, tossing a screwdriver to the ground with a clang. "Your town, huh? Watch this." He slid into the driver's seat, jamming a key or something close to it, into the ignition. The engine sputtered, roared for a split second, then died with a pathetic wheeze. D slammed the steering wheel, cursing loud enough to wake half the block. His crew froze, glancing around like deer in headlights. Jake couldn't help it. A grin tugged at his mouth. He'd worked on that car 2 days ago, rewiring the starter himself. Mrs. Hargrove had complained about it stalling. Now it was stalling D's big escape. Karma didn't waste time tonight. "Get out of here, D," Jake said, stepping closer, his voice low but firm. "Before this gets worse for you." D's smirk vanished, replaced by a glare that could have melted steel. He kicked the door open, climbing out with a swagger that didn't quite hide his frustration. "You're gonna regret sticking your nose in this, Thompson." His crew shuffled behind him, twitchy and unsure, as he pointed a finger at Jake like a loaded gun. "Let's roll, boys. Plan B." They scattered toward a pair of scooters parked nearby, engines buzzing as they peeled off into the night. Jake watched them go, the hum fading into the cricket's chorus. He shook his head, muttering, "Dumb move, D." Then he turned back to his garage, the wrench still lying where he'd dropped it. Something told him this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Ever seen karma strike that fast? Stick around to find out how this small-town hero takes on the troublemakers, and drop your own InstantKarma stories in the comments below. Jake Thompson leaned against the counter of his garage the next morning, the scent of motor oil and fresh coffee mixing in the air. Sunlight streamed through the big windows, glinting off the tools hung neatly on the pegboard, a mechanic's sanctuary in the heart of Maplewood. The town wasn't much to look at on a map, a grid of clapboard houses, a diner called Patty's, and a grain elevator looming over the flat horizon like a Midwest skyscraper. But to Jake, it was home, where folks waved from pickup trucks and left their doors unlocked, trusting the world to stay kind. He sipped his coffee, black and strong, watching a beat-up Ford roll in for its oil change. The driver, a lanky teen named Corey with a mop of blonde hair, hopped out and grinned. "Morning, Jake. Got time to show me that trick with the spark plugs again?" Corey was Jake's unofficial apprentice, a kid who'd rather turn wrenches than scroll TikTok all day. Jake liked that about him, reminded him of himself at that age. "Sure thing," Jake said, setting his mug down. "Grab the toolbox. Let's get dirty." Teaching Corey was his way of giving back to Maplewood, a place that had patched him up after his dad passed and his mom moved south. He'd built this shop from nothing, and every oil-stained handshake or "thanks, Jake" from a customer felt like a brick in its foundation. Across town, though, trouble brewed like a storm on the plains. Derek D. Lawson didn't see Maplewood as home. He saw it as a playground. At 24, he'd already racked up a rap sheet longer than a country song, shoplifting from the gas and go, spray painting crude tags on the water tower, joyriding in cars he didn't own. Lately, he'd leveled up, rounding up a crew of misfits who followed him like stray dogs chasing scraps. D wasn't just reckless, he was restless, itching to prove he was bigger than this speck of a town. Sheriff Emily Carter knew D better than most. From her office in the squat brick building on Main Street, she'd watched him spiral since high school, where he'd been more likely to ditch class than ace it. Emily was tough but fair, her badge pinned to a uniform pressed crisp every morning. She'd pulled D over for speeding last week, his truck fishtailing past the diner, and he'd just laughed through the ticket. "Can't catch me forever, Sheriff," he'd said, peeling out before she could reply. She'd added extra patrols since, but D was a shadow, slippery and bold. Then there was Lisa Nguyen, Maplewood's one-woman news machine. She ran the Maplewood Minute, a website that chronicled everything from bake sales to barn fires. Lisa was sharp, her dark eyes always scanning for the next scoop. She'd been tracking D's antics, posting blurry photos of his graffiti or scooter stunts, and her latest piece, Trouble on Two Wheels, had riled folks up. Comments piled in, "Lock him up. Kid's a menace." Lisa thrived on it, her laptop humming late into the night. By noon, Jake was elbow-deep in the Ford's engine when Old Man Jenkins shuffled by with his mutt, Rusty. Tom Jenkins was Maplewood's unofficial sage, white beard, flannel shirt, and a voice like gravel. "Heard about last night?" he called, pausing at the garage door. "D's digging his own grave, mark my words." Jake wiped his brow, nodding. "Hope you're right, Tom. Guy's pushing it too far." "He'll trip over his own boots soon enough," Jenkins said with a wink, tugging Rusty along. "Always does." Jake chuckled, but unease gnawed at him. D wasn't the type to slink off quietly, not after last night's embarrassment. Maplewood's peace was fraying, and Jake could feel the threads pulling loose. The moon hung fat and silver over Maplewood 3 nights later, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Jake Thompson was locking up his garage, the jingle of keys echoing in the still air. It had been a long day, 2 oil changes, a busted radiator, and Corey's endless questions about torque. He was ready for a cold beer and the Cardinals game on replay. But as he turned the deadbolt, a faint clang snapped him alert. It came from inside the shop. Jake froze, ears straining. Another sound. Metal scraping metal, muffled but unmistakable. His pulse kicked up. He'd left the bay doors cracked for ventilation. Someone must have slipped in. Quietly, he pocketed his keys and eased back inside, sticking to the shadows along the wall. The fluorescent lights were off, but moonlight spilled through the windows, glinting off his tools, and illuminating a figure prying at his red toolbox with a crowbar. Derek D. Lawson. Even in the dimness, Jake knew that leather jacket and cocky slouch. D's crew hovered nearby. Wiry kid from the car night and a stocky guy with a shaved head, rifling through shelves, stuffing sockets and wrenches into a duffel. Jake's jaw tightened. This wasn't just theft. It was personal. D was hitting him where it hurt. Jake stepped into the light, voice steady despite the heat rising in his chest. "You're making a big mistake, D." D spun around, crowbar still in hand, his smirk flickering before settling back in place. "Well, well, look who's playing hero again." He tossed the tool between his hands like a toy. "What's it to you, huh? Call the sheriff. I'll be gone before she rolls up in that rusty cruiser." Jake crossed his arms, planting himself between D and the exit. "This is my shop, my tools. You don't get to waltz in and take what's mine." Dee laughed, sharp and mean. Yours? This town's a joke, and you're the punchline, Thompson. Step aside, or I'll make you. He raised the crowbar, not swinging yet, just letting it hang there, a threat wrapped in bravado. Before Jake could answer, a blaring whoop, whoop, whoop split the night. The garage alarm, loud enough to wake half of Maplewood, shrieked to life. Dee's crew flinched, dropping tools that clattered to the floor. Jake's eyes flicked past them to the open bay door, where Old Man Jenkins stood with Rusty, his wrinkled hand still on the alarm button mounted outside. The old man must have been walking his dog and heard the commotion. Get out of there, you punks, Jenkins hollered, his voice cutting through the noise. Rusty barked like a junkyard guard, hackles up. Dee's smirk vanished. Move, he snapped at his crew, shoving Wiry Kid toward the scooters parked out back. They stumbled over each other, the duffel spilling half its loot as they bolted. Dee lingered a beat longer, locking eyes with Jake. This ain't over, grease monkey, he hissed, then sprinted after his gang. The scooters roared to life, their taillights shrinking into the dark. Jake exhaled, the alarm still wailing until Jenkins hobbled over and punched the code to silence it. You okay, son? The old man asked, scratching Rusty's ears. Yeah, Jake said, though his hands shook as he picked up a dropped wrench. Thanks, Tom. That was quick thinking. Jenkins shrugged. Knew that button'd come in handy someday. Dee's a fool, picking a fight with you. Jake managed a tight smile, but his gut churned. Dee wasn't done, not after a humiliation like that. He glanced at the scattered tools, the toolbox dented from the crowbar. This was war now, and Maplewood was the battlefield. The next morning, Maplewood woke to a mess. Jake Thompson stepped out of his garage to find the words, "Watch your back," scrawled across the bay doors in jagged red spray paint. The letters dripped like blood, stark against the faded white paint he'd touched up last spring. He clenched his fists, the sting of Dee's break-ins still fresh. This wasn't just a warning. It was a middle finger to everything he'd built. By noon, Dee's retaliation spree was in full swing. Lisa Nguyen's Maplewood Minute lit up with reports. Tires slashed on Jake's pickup out front, a brick through the garage's side window, even a crude drawing of Jake with a wrench through his head left on Patty's diner doorstep. Dee wasn't subtle. He wanted the town to know he was untouchable. Lisa tapped away at her laptop in the diner, her coffee cold as she uploaded photos. This guy's losing it, she muttered to Jake over the clatter of plates. I'm running a piece tonight. Dee's reign of chaos. Be careful, Jake warned, sliding into the booth across from her. He's not above coming after you, too. Lisa smirked, brushing her dark bangs aside. Let him try. I've got a taser and a deadline. Her defiance was Maplewood through and through, stubborn as the prairie wind. Sheriff Emily Carter wasn't sitting idle either. She'd heard about the break-in from Jenkins at dawn and rolled up to Jake's garage in her cruiser, boots crunching glass from the busted window. I've got deputies patrolling every block, she said, her voice clipped. But Dee's a ghost, hits and runs before we can pin him. She tipped her hat back, frustration creasing her brow. You see him? You call me. No hero stuff, Jake. Too late for that, Jake said with a dry laugh, kicking a shard of glass aside. He's made it personal. The town felt it too. By evening, neighbors trickled in, Corey with a broom to sweep up, Mrs. Hargrove with a plate of cookies, even Patty from the diner hauling a thermos of chili. We're not letting that punk run us down, Patty declared, ladling a bowl for Jake. Corey and a few teens offered to camp out overnight, guarding the shop with baseball bats and bravado. Maplewood was small, but it was tough. Folks didn't back down when one of their own was under fire. The tension boiled over at the town hall meeting that night. The community center was packed, folding chairs creaking under farmers, shopkeepers, and retirees. Jake stood up front, hands in his pockets, as voices overlapped, angry, scared, determined. We can't let Dee tear us apart, he said, his voice carrying over the buzz. We stick together, We'll get through this. The double doors banged open mid-sentence. Dee swaggered in, leather jacket gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his crew trailing like a pack of wolves. The room went silent, every eye on him. "You're all weak," he sneered, pacing the aisle. "Hiding behind your little hero here? Pathetic. Watch what real power looks like soon." He locked eyes with Jake, a grin splitting his face, then spun on his heel and stormed out, leaving a wake of gasps and murmurs. Jake's stomach sank. Dee wasn't bluffing. He had something big planned. Sheriff Carter gripped her radio, barking orders for a tail, but Dee's scooters were already buzzing into the night. Lisa scribbled notes furiously, whispering, "This is gold." Old man Jenkins, seated in the back, just shook his head. "Boy's digging deeper," he muttered to Rusty. As the crowd dispersed, Jake stood alone under the hall's flickering lights, the weight of Dee's words pressing down. Whatever was coming, it had hit hard, and soon. Things are getting intense in Maplewood. What's Dee planning? Share your guesses in the comments, and don't forget to spread this video to friends who love a good showdown. Stick with us. 2 days after the town hall, Maplewood's air crackled with unease. Jake Thompson felt it as he walked into First Prairie Bank just before closing, a wad of cash from the garage tucked in his pocket. Dee's threat, "Watch what real power looks like," looped in his head like a stuck record. The bank was quiet, just a handful of customers milling around. Mrs. Hargrove depositing her library paycheck, a farmer in overalls at the teller window. Jake nodded to the manager, Mr. Ellison, a wiry guy with a nervous tic who'd been jumpy since Dee's spree started. Then the front doors burst open with a bang. D. Lawson stormed in, black ski mask pulled low, a pistol waving in his gloved hand. His crew followed, wiry kid and shaved head, brandishing crowbars and duffels. "Everybody down," D bellowed, his voice bouncing off the tiled walls. "This is a stick-up! Move it!" Customers yelped, dropping to the floor. Mrs. Hargrove clutched her purse, whispering prayers. Jake hit the deck behind a counter, heart hammering, but kept his eyes on D. "Fill the bags," D barked at his crew, shoving a teller toward the vault. "We're out in 2 minutes." He'd planned this, hit the bank and skip town, leaving Maplewood in his dust. But the universe had other ideas. First came the locks. Mr. Ellison, trembling at the counter, had installed new security after Dee's threats, silent triggers wired to the doors. As Dee's crew rushed the vault, a low clunk echoed through the lobby. Steel bolts slammed into place, sealing every exit. Dee spun around, wild-eyed. "What the hell was that?" "New system," Ellison stammered, then, almost smirking, hit the panic button under his desk. A siren wailed outside, faint but growing louder. Dee cursed, slamming his fist into a wall. "Open it now!" Ellison shrank back. "Can't. It's on a timer. Cops'll be here first." Jake crouched low, pulled out his phone and fired off a text to Sheriff Carter. "Bank, D." Now he peeked over the counter. D was unraveling, pacing like a caged animal, while his crew fumbled at the vault. Wiry kid tripped over a chair, spilling tools from his bag. Shaved head yanked at a locked cash drawer, red-faced and swearing. Then came the floor. A janitor had mopped earlier, leaving a slick patch near the deposit slips. D, storming toward Ellison, hit it full speed, boots sliding out from under him. He flailed, arms windmilling, and crashed into a display of loan pamphlets. The wooden stand toppled, pinning him with a thud that knocked the wind, and the gun, out of him. It skittered across the tile, landing near Jake. The crew froze, jaws dropping. Jake seized the moment, lunging for the pistol and kicking it under a desk, out of reach. "Stay down," he shouted at Wiry Kid, who'd started toward D. The kid hesitated, then bolted for a back exit, only to smack into the locked steel door, crumpling with a groan. Outside, tires screeched. Sheriff Carter's cruiser skidded up, lights flashing, deputies piling out with rifles drawn. "Drop it!" Her voice boomed through a megaphone. Shaved head, still clutching a crowbar, panicked and swung at the vault, only to ricochet off and clock himself in the jaw. He slumped, out cold. Dee groaned under the wreckage, shoving pamphlets aside as he staggered up. But Jake was faster. He grabbed a heavy ledger from the counter and hurled it, nailing Dee square in the chest. Dee stumbled back, tripping over his own duffel, and hit the floor again, just as Carter's deputies breached the side entrance, battering rams splintering the lock. "Hands up, Lawson!" Carter yelled, storming in. Deputies swarmed, cuffing Dee and his dazed crew in seconds. Jake darted to a fire exit, waving Mrs. Hargrove and the others out as Carter hauled Dee up by his jacket. "Told you I'd catch you," she said, shoving him toward the cruiser. The lobby fell quiet, save for Ellison's shaky laugh. "That," he said, pointing at Dee's sprawl, "was worth every penny of that security upgrade." Jake caught his breath, adrenaline still buzzing. Dee's real power had flopped, hard, and Maplewood had won. The sun rose over Maplewood the next morning, bathing the town in a golden glow that felt like a fresh start. Sheriff Emily Carter's cruiser rolled down Main Street. Dee Lawson and his crew slumped in the back, wrists cuffed and heads low. Word of the bank heist fiasco spread faster than wildfire on the plains. By breakfast, Patty's diner was packed with folks swapping stories over pancakes and coffee. Jake Thompson leaned against his garage counter, still wired from the night before, as neighbors trickled in with high fives and hugs. "You should have seen Dee's face when that stand fell on him," Corey laughed, sweeping up glass from the earlier vandalism. Like a cartoon villain, bam, down he went. The teen's eyes sparkled with pride, and Jake clapped him on the shoulder. "Couldn't have gotten those folks out without you keeping watch here," Jake said. "You're tougher than you look, kid." By noon, Maplewood decided to celebrate. The town square, usually just a patch of grass with a flagpole, transformed into a festival. Tables groaned under potluck dishes, casseroles, cornbread, Mrs. Hargrove's famous snickerdoodles. Kids ran around with sparklers left over from the 4th, and someone cranked a playlist of Springsteen and Johnny Cash through a borrowed speaker. Jake stood off to the side, sipping a lemonade, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't big on crowds, but this was different. Lisa Nguyen wove through the chaos, camera in hand, snapping shots for the Maplewood Minute. She thrust a wooden plaque at Jake, engraved with "Community Hero, Jake Thompson." "Don't argue," she said, cutting off his protest. "You earned it. Texting Carter, tossing that ledger? Half the town's calling you Maplewood's Batman." Jake chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just did what anyone would." "Not anyone." Old man Jenkins piped up, ambling over with Rusty at his heels. The old man's flannel was buttoned crooked, but his grin was sharp. "What goes around comes around, folks. Dee sowed trouble, and he reaped a whole heap of it." He winked at Jake. "You just helped the harvest along." The crowd parted as Sheriff Carter approached, her boots dusty from the night's work. "Dee's crew's spilling everything. Petty thefts, the garage hit, all of it," she said. "They'll be cooling their heels in county lockup for a while. Town's safe again, thanks to you." Jake shrugged. "Team effort. You and Ellison sealed the deal." Carter smirked. "Ellison's still bragging about that panic button. Might name it after you." As the festival hummed on, a skinny figure edged toward Jake, wiry kid's younger brother Ethan, barely 16, with a mop of dark hair and a nervous shuffle. He'd idolized Dee, trailing the crew like a lost pup. Now he stared at his sneakers, voice low. "I thought Dee was cool. Turns out he's just dumb. You got any work at the shop? I want to do something right for once." Jake studied him, then nodded. "Show up Monday. Corey'll show you the ropes. No shortcuts, though. Got it?" Ethan's face lit up. "Got it. Thanks, man." The day faded into dusk, the crowd thinning as stars pricked the sky. Jake sat on a bench with Jenkins, watching fireflies blink over the square. "Think Dee'll learn anything from this?" Jake asked. Jenkins snorted. "Doubt it. but Maplewood did. Stand together and nothing breaks us. Rusty woofed in agreement, and Jake smiled. In Maplewood, standing up for what's right showed karma's never far behind. Thanks for watching. Love this story? Check out our other videos on small-town heroes and instant justice. Subscribe now, more's on the way. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What's your favorite karma moment from this tale?